Would you relate the substance of those two conversations as nearly as you can recall? On the first conversation, it was approximately 2 weeks prior to the time that the preliminary hearing was held. It was in the Municipal Court of Downey. We discussed the slot machine and disposition of the slot machine. At that time, he stated to me that they had confidential information that there was narcotics at the Ron Brown residence and that he did not wish to go into the confidential nature of his information. He stated that he was not looking for narcotics when he went to the house. They had information about the slot machine, and that is all they were interested in. On the second occasion, which was the date that the preliminary hearing was held, we again had a discussion both in the hallway and in the courtroom prior to being transferred to another courtroom. At that time, he discussed again the fact that he had confidential information that there was narcotics in the house. And I asked him, well, did you go into that when you were at the house? And he said, no. The matter of narcotics was never brought up nor discussed while we were at the Brown house prior to finding narcotics. Nothing further, Your Honor. Mr. Pearson, Mr. Friedman, are those the officer's exact words, or is that what you might say in substance was said? You mean the latter portion of my testimony, counsel? Well, all of the testimony pertaining to these conversations. To answer your question, I would say that my testimony was the substance of what the officer said, with the exception that when we were in the courtroom, that portion of the testimony he stated to me, and his words are fairly close to being exactly what he said, that the subject matter of narcotics was never discussed prior to our finding them. Now that again is in substance rather than the precise words. Well, precisely, the word subject matter of narcotics was never discussed. Those words were used by the officer. Now, he might have used different words from the way I described, but those words were in fact used. And was that his testimony at the preliminary hearing also? No, it wasn't. He had inconsistent testimony at that time. I object to that, Your Honor, as being a conclusion on the part of the witness. Well, maybe he means it was different than. That is the way I understand the word inconsistent, Your Honor. You had better rephrase your question. Sir, I take it at the preliminary hearing immediately after these conversations that the testimony was to the effect that narcotics was discussed on that occasion prior to them being found. Is that correct? Yes, he testified that the question of narcotics was discussed. If you want, not exactly again, but I can tell you what he did say in that regard. And you had a conversation with the same officer today prior to taking the stand concerning his conversations. Isn't that correct in the hallway? No. You haven't discussed it today with Officer Englert? Not his testimony. No. Other than, good morning, hello, how is Oregon? Do you grow beards up in Oregon also? That type of thing. All right, let's stop there. This is going to be 12 minutes. 12 minutes, 200, 4 boys, for 12 minutes. We're starting off with the court. We're in colloquy, going into cross-examination by defense attorney. Defense attorney is Mr. Kazan. Kazan? K-A-Z-A-N. Plaintiff's attorney is Mr. Tester. T-E-S-T-E-R. All right. Starts with the court. Case number 57202, People of the State of California against Russell Willits. This matters on for a motion under 1538.5 of the Penal Code, a motion to suppress. A preliminary hearing on this matter was held on Friday, December the 28th, 1982, at which hearing Mr. Willits was represented by Roger Smith from the Public Defender's Office. People were represented by David DeLong. It's my understanding, gentlemen, Mr. Kazan, Mr. Tester, and that you are prepared to stipulate that that transcript can be admitted into evidence subject to any further cross-examination or direct examination of any officers or witnesses that may testify. That's correct, Your Honor. Now that would be our stipulation, Your Honor. We would admit the preliminary hearing transcript at the outset for the purpose of the district attorney's case, and then we would like to cross-examine further on old testimony that was entered there, or wherever other cross-examination I might have. Yes, the record will reflect that, having knowledge now of that stipulation, that the court had read the transcript in its entirety and perused it at great length. And if you are prepared to call your first witness, Mr. Tester. Yes, Your Honor. Before I do that, Your Honor, I also ask the court to take judicial notice of the court document filed April 10, 1978, which by Judge Jason, which he originally put the defendant on probation. May I see that, please? And specifically the condition, the search and seizure condition, which required the defendant to submit to search by either a probation officer or a police officer at any time. Yeah, the court, having knowledge that that condition was imposed by Judge Jason, did in fact review the wording that was used by Judge Jason in placing Mr. Willits on probation. That wording is also contained in the preliminary hearing transcript. So the court, whether it takes judicial notice or gleans that knowledge from the transcript, Your Honor, I would, as opposed to perhaps taking judicial notice, it might be more appropriate if the district attorney has this marked and entered into evidence, as it's one of the items that should be entered into evidence. Yes, it will be marked People's Number 1 and be introduced for all purposes. Thank you, Your Honor. Will you raise your right hand, please? You solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in the cause now pending before the court shall be the truth, so help you God? I do. Be seated. Would you state your name and spell it for the record, please? David Koupa, K-O-U-P-A. Thank you. Mr. Tester, did you have any further questions of Officer Koupa in light of the fact that your transcript has been admitted for all purposes? And no, Your Honor. Mr. Kazan, you may cross-examine. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Officer Koupa, you were in the area of the residence, Mr. Willits' residence, at approximately 1:55 in the afternoon. Is that correct? Yes. And that was on December 4, is that right? Yes. Oh, you were not in the area for the purpose of contacting Mr. Willits for anything, is that right? That's correct. You were there at that point in time investigating some narcotics activity about somebody else in another location, is that right? Yes. All right. You were also with Officer Rucker, is that correct? Yes, sir. All right. How long had you been in the area at that point in time at 1:55 that afternoon? I just arrived in the area. All right. How long have you been conducting the investigation of the other residents or the other individual? Oh, I have to estimate a couple days. All right. Had you been in that area again the day before? Before that? No. Now, were you driving the vehicle, by the way? Yes. And Officer Rucker, I take it, was a passenger? Yes, in your vehicle. Was it a marked or unmarked vehicle? Unmarked. All right. Were you in or out of uniform, sir? Out of uniform. Out of uniform? Yes. All right. You, I take it, you were driving by Mr. Willits' house when you observed him. Is that correct? Yes. All right. Now, at some point, you decided to stop and contact Mr. Willits. Is that right? Yes. And that was while you were driving by his residence and upon observing him. Is that right? Yes. All right. What was Mr. Willits doing when you first observed him? It appeared that he was trying to hide from me. Well, specifically, where was he at? He was on the passenger side of a pickup truck that was in the driveway of his residence. All right. And what was he doing on the passenger side when you first observed him? What was he doing? It appeared that he had just put something in the back of the truck. In the bed. Bed? Yes. All right. Did you stop your vehicle at that point in time? No. All right. When did you make the decision to contact Mr. Willits? After I observed Mr. Willits trying to avoid me looking at him or spotting him. Did he look in your direction, officer? Oh, yes. All right. And he observed, to the best of your, well, strike that. In looking in your direction, what did he do after that? He crouched down behind the pickup, and as I continued down, which would be northbound on 79th Street, he continued in a crouched position, going around his pickup truck, and occasionally looking up to see where I am, where I was located. All right. You didn't have an arrest warrant or anything at that point in time, did you? No. All right. Now, You also had some information, is that correct, concerning Mr. Willits? Oh, yes, all right. And when had you gotten that information? We just about had continuous information regarding Mr. Willits' activity. When was the first time you got information concerning him? I don't recall. It would be several months prior. We conducted probation searches on his residence prior to this. All right. One of the purposes that you had in stopping and in deciding to contact Mr. Willits, wasn't it? Was that you had some information from an informant? And that would be one of the reasons. All right. And when did you get that specific information from the informant that gave rise to your contacting Mr. Willits? That would be hard to say, sir, because I put it at probably a week prior to that. All right. Now, this informant, is he known to you? Objection on relevancy, Your Honor. Well, on that particular question, I assume that it goes to indicate how much knowledge this officer has. He's not asking him for his identity. He's just asking, does he know him? Do you understand that particular question? Yes, and the answer is yes. All right. And how long had you known this informant? Prior to that, a couple months. All right. Had you worked with that informant before? Yes. Had he given you information before? Yes. All right. Now, what specific information did the informant give you concerning Mr. Willits prior to your contacting him on that date? Mr. Willits, Your Honor, I would object as to relevancy unless the officer based the stopping of the defendant upon the information. Well, okay, fine. You did not base your stopping of just a minute, Mr. Kazan. He lodged an objection. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I have the transcript of the preliminary hearing. That area was gone into, this officer, well, based on that transcript, he did in fact base that on one of the very reasons that he did in stopping Mr. Willits. Your objections overruled. You want to answer the question? Could you repeat the question? I was trying. I think the question I asked was, what specifically did this informant tell you concerning Mr. Willits' activity? That Mr. Willits was dealing in methamphetamines and stolen property. What? Did he give you a date that Mr. Willits was allegedly engaged in that kind of contact? No. Did he give you a specific place that he was engaging in that kind of conduct? Yes. Where was that? Mr. Willits' residence. All right. And did he indicate to you that he had been inside that residence and observed that conduct? I don't recall. All right. Did he give you, to the best of your recollection, did he give you any information that would suggest that he had personal knowledge concerning Mr. Willits' conduct? I would have to say yes. And what was that information? That Mr. Willits was involved in transactions of methamphetamine. All right. But did he tell you that he observed that transaction, that he knew where it happened, etc.? That type of information to the best of your recollection. Well, on that part, I would have to guess, so I'd rather say I don't recall. All right. Now, you never stopped the search warrant for Mr. Willits' residence on his person, did you? No. Based upon either the informant's information or based upon any other information you had? That's correct. All right. And you've indicated that one of the reasons you stopped Mr. Willits was because of this informant's statement. Were there other reasons? Yes. And what were those other reasons? His activity after he observed me. All right. The crouching and moving around the pickup truck? Yes. All right. Could that activity have been consistent with Mr. Willits checking the tires on that pickup truck? No. All right. Now, you were aware that Mr. Willits was on probation, is that correct? Yes. All right. And you were aware that he was on searchable probation, is that right? Yes, sir. You have, well, I take it over the period of time of approximately 4 or 5 months prior to this last contact, you had made several probation searches of Mr. Willits' residence, is that right? Yes. All right. Can you tell me how many you yourself have made? I've conducted probation searches at that residence on 2 different occasions. All right. How long prior to this contact was the last probation search? I don't recall. Was it a short period or a long period to the best of your recollection? A short period of time. Well, within a month, month and a half, 2 months. All right. And prior to that, had you made another probation search within a short period of time? Yes. All right. To the best of your knowledge, Officer Koopa, have other probation searches been made of Mr. Willits' residence by the HIP squad? I don't recall. You don't recall? No. All right. You yourself have been involved in 2, is that correct? Yes. Have you never found any drugs in Mr. Willits' possession during the course of your searches, is that right? That's correct. All right. Have you been alone when you conducted those searches? No. You've been accompanied by a probation officer? Your Honor, as to questions regarding the prior searches, I would make an irrelevancy objection. Mr. Kazan, yes, Your Honor, I think we can. It's relevant in terms of harassment that's been bestowed upon Mr. Willits, as it were. He's been subject to constant police searches of his residence based upon the probation condition without probation officers by the HIP squad at several occasions when nothing has been found, and I think it's a constant pattern that we're trying to establish. Doesn't Peoples 1 reflect that search may be made by any peace officer or law enforcement? It does, Your Honor. However, there are still limitations as to how much harassment the law enforcement officers can do, even under a broad search condition. That's true. It depends on the circumstances surrounding each search. I assume those circumstances surrounding the search would be relevant prior to making the question whether a probation officer was present with this officer or not relevant. Therefore, I'll sustain the objection, not on the grounds that he laid, but on the grounds of relevancy to that particular question. All right, on the prior search, the first, well, let's use the search that's closest in time to the arrest of Mr. Willits. On this particular date, December 4, on that search again, you indicate you were not alone, is that right? Yes, I was not alone. All right. Had you some information concerning Mr. Willits at that point in time? I don't recall that that was my particular case, or I was the lead investigator on that particular case. And so you don't recall whether there was any investigation or not? All right. At that point in time, was a probation officer with you at that point in time, to the best of your knowledge? I don't recall if there was. All right. And prior to that 1 hour search, I guess I'm mixing up dates because we don't know which dates, but on the second search, all right, was there any information regarding Mr. Willits at that time when you went to search the residence to the best of your recollection? Yes, I was the one. I was the lead investigator on the first search that was conducted on Mr. Willits on a probation search. If you want to refer to that as being the one that I was in charge with, why, I did receive information that Mr. Willits was in possession of stolen weapons. All right. Did you find any stolen weapons? No. All right. Did you get that information from an informant? Yes. Was it the same informant who gave you information concerning Mr. Willits on the date of this arrest? No. All right. And did you go into that residence alone? No. At that time? No. You again were with more than one person. Is that right? Yes. How many people were there when you made that search? I'd have to estimate 5, 6 officers. All right. And how many people on the search after that were with you? The same. All right. And on neither occasion was a probation officer present, is that right? I do not recall that a probation officer was present. All right. On either occasion, had you contacted a probation officer regarding a probation search? On the first one, I contacted a probation officer to determine if Mr. Willits was on searchable probation. All right. Did that probation officer indicate he wanted the search done to the best of your recollection? I do not recall. All right. On this particular search, on the one on December 4 that we're talking about now, you were not with a probation officer, is that right? I don't recall that a probation officer was there. Okay. And on this search and this arrest of Mr. Willits, you hadn't contacted a probation officer concerning Mr. Willits' activity on probation, had you? I had not, no. Who was the probation officer you contacted on the one time you did make contact with? One, objection as to relevancy, Your Honor. Oh, objection's overruled. He can answer if he has knowledge, if he remembers. I do not remember. All right. Was Officer Rucker with you on either one of those other 2 occasions, Officer Koopa? The best I can recall, he was with me on the second search. Now, getting back to December 4, 1982, at approximately 1:55, did you turn your car around to go back after Mr. Willits? Yes. All right. And what, if anything, happened at that point in time? Mr. Willits broke and ran. Where was he running to? Where was he running? In what direction? Behind his residence. All right. Did you follow him? Detective Rucker did. He jumped out of the car? Yes. What did you do? I drove south on 79th Street to 39th Avenue, thinking that I would cut him off if he continued to run through the field. At which time I observed that he run around the house, and so I turned my vehicle around. And at that point in time, when I went back on 79th Street from 39th Avenue, I observed Mr. Willits driving the vehicle with a female passenger going northbound on 79th Street. All right, now, you observed Mr. Willits driving a vehicle northbound 79th Street with a female, is that right? Yes. Had you observed the female prior to your contact with Mr. Willits, the first contact? Yes. All right, now, you observed Mr. Willis driving a vehicle northbound 79th Street with a female, is that right? Yes. Had you observed the female prior to your contact with Mr. Willis, the first contact? Yes, all right. So you knew he was with somebody else at the time when, just before he started ducking around the truck, is that right? Yes. Now, were there other vehicles at the residence besides the truck? I do not recall any, all right. Now, having been in contact with Mr. Willis on other occasions, did you know, or you knew, didn't you, that the pickup truck was not Mr. Willis? Yes, all right. Did you check the registration on the pickup truck before making any contact with that truck? Didn't have time. All right. Subsequent to your stop, did you check the registration on the pickup truck? Yes, sir. And it came back belonging to somebody other than Mr. Willis, is that right? Yes. All right. Okay, now, Officer Koopa, now, when you saw the truck driving down 79th Street, did you make an attempt to pull it over? Yes. All right. What attempt did you make? Pulled up alongside of him and hollered, "Police department," showed the police badge. What side of the truck did you pull up? Driver's side. All right. And you were still driving your vehicle? Yes. Is that right? Who showed the police badge? I did. All right. While you were driving? Yes. Okay. And did you draw your weapon and exhibit it to Mr. Willis to get him to pull over the truck? Subsequently, I did. Yes. How long after the original showing of the badge and asking him to pull over? After it was obvious he was going to pull over. How long in time? 30 seconds, a minute, half a minute? Can you give me an estimate or a guesstimate? Probably up to a minute. All right. How far down 79th Street did you travel? I went to 39th Avenue. Can you do this for me, Officer Koopa? Can you give me a diagram, please, where you first started chasing the truck, when you first began following the truck, and where ultimately it was pulled over? Can't we just go, let's just do it verbally, do it by street. We can get the distance, he can state the distance, or let's go street by street. I'm familiar with the city of Sacramento. What street did you first start behind the truck? On 79th Street. 225, four voice for 5 minutes. Starts with direct by plaintiff's attorney. Officer, calling your attention to the date of the preliminary hearing held in Downey Municipal Court on June 26, 1999. Prior to that hearing, did you have a brief discussion with the attorney, Mr. Friedman, concerning this particular case? Yes, sir, I did. On that occasion, did you make the statement to him that at the time of the arrest, there was no discussion or mention of narcotics until after you had found the narcotics? No, sir. We didn't even talk about that. Do you recall any discussion with him at that time concerning the discussion of narcotics at the time of the arrest? Yes, sir, I did. I mean, at the time of the conversation we discussed narcotics. I was quite open with him. I took him in my confidence, and I feel like I have been backstabbed since. I told him we had an informant, and I didn't want to bring it up, and I didn't want to bring up the narcotics because of this informant, but we didn't talk about things that happened that I said to the defense prior to placing the defendant under arrest at all. I have no further questions, Your Honor. Officer, specifically referring to a conversation in the courtroom, do you recall that conversation? There were several. I was approached by Mr. Friedman, and I approached him. Probably I talked to him about 5 different times in the 2 different appearances we made in Downey Municipal Court. And you don't ever recall making the statement that narcotics was not mentioned? I know what I talked to him about. Wait, narcotics was not mentioned when? I was going to say during the raid, Your Honor, if I may use that phrase. I don't think we even talked about that. In fact, I am sure we didn't talk about it. I talked to him and told him in confidence that we did have an informant, and I think I even told who the informant was and not the name. And for the sake of this informant who told me about the narcotics, I just didn't wish that the defendant knew about it because there was a close association there. I took him in my confidence about this, and this is what we discussed. I have nothing further, Your Honor. Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you. People rest. All right. One witness for surrebuttal, Your Honor. Very well. Mr. Brown, Bob Brown. Raise your right hand, please. You do solemnly swear that the testimony you may give and the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God? I do. Be seated and state your name, please. Robert W. Brown. Mr. Brown, are you related to the defendant? Yes, I am. What is your relationship? He is my son. Do you recall overhearing a conversation between Mr. Friedman and Detective Englert in the courtroom at the Downey Municipal Court? Yes, I was present during a conversation there, yes. Do you recall the detective saying anything about whether or not he had mentioned narcotics during the raid on your son's home? He mentioned that when he went there, narcotics wasn't even mentioned or thought about. And did he say that during the raid the term narcotics had not been used? I will object, Your Honor. That is leading and suggestive. Overruled. Go ahead. Would you repeat that, please? Did he say that during the raid the term narcotics had not been used before the narcotics were found? As I recall, he mentioned that they had gone there for the purpose of a slot machine and they hadn't even thought or even mentioned narcotics. He said he hadn't even thought of the idea of narcotics at the time. That will be all, Your Honor. Just a minute, Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, what was the date of these conversations you overheard? I couldn't recall that. There was a record. It was at, I believe, the preliminary hearing or arraignment. The first appearance in court it was. I take it wasn't at the time the preliminary hearing was actually held. It was some other time. All I can tell you, it was in Judge Cook's court in Downey. I don't remember just exactly that was the preliminary hearing or whether it was held over. Where were the officer and Mr. Friedman at the time they were conversing? Just at the bar, at the bench, like he was sitting in a seat. Mr. Englert sitting in a seat, and the attorney was talking to him, and I was standing right alongside of him. You were standing right next to him at that time? Yes, I was. Did you overhear the entire conversation? No, I did not. I walked up there and stood for a few minutes, and then I walked away. I was there a minute or two or three. Did you make any particular notes of those conversations? No, I did not. In other words, you are recalling in essence what was said without recalling the specific words. Isn't that correct? Well, it would be rather impossible to recall exact words he used, but I do remember him mentioning to my attorney afterwards, or to Mr. Friedman afterwards, why did he go look for narcotics if he didn't go there after them? In other words, the gist of the conversation you overheard was the main reason the officers went there was to look for a slot machine. Isn't that correct? That's right. I have no further questions, Your Honor. Nothing further. All right, thank you. Okay, 180 RPR lit. Mr. President, I congratulate the senator from Ohio, who is the ranking minority member of the subcommittee, the senator from Minnesota, and the senator from Wisconsin for the work they did on the bill when it was considered in subcommittee and in committee. It is a very complex problem, and the further one gets into the bill, the more complicated it becomes. We had some open hearings on the bill. A number of changes were made to it. I believe there was some study and some consideration of the important points involved. But I am not a bit certain that under the pressure of work within which this committee operates, sufficient attention